Good morning. We are very excited to host a Professional by Pathway career exploration event to help students connect their learning career opportunities. I am Lorraine Wikoff, and I am excited to welcome Emily and Venetia with IH, Washington Department of Labor and Health Industries, as our guests today. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded for future students, so that way they can benefit from our speakers. We have the next 30 minutes to learn about this career field, the education that is needed to enter and grow within this industry, and what advice our speakers have for our students. We will be monitoring any questions that students submit. Let's get started so our students can learn about various professions and how they can prepare for their future. Venetia and Emily, tell us about your career field and how you would like how to get started in growth opportunities, pay, and more.
Great. Well, we thought first we'd get started with some slides that will explain what IH actually is. So if that's okay, I'll just dive right into sharing my screen. And hopefully that's working.
Yes.
Okay. So as Lorraine said, my name is Venetia, and Emily and I are going to talk to you about a career as an IH, what it means and how you can join our ranks. Emily and I both work for the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries for the state OSHA program. So OSHA is one of the groups that hires industrial hygienists. So the slideshow was put together by the American Industrial Hygiene Association. So we'll go ahead and get started. Emily, I think you're up next.
Yeah. So the aim of IH is to prevent related injuries and illnesses, which makes this job very rewarding. Another title I have with Washington State Labor and Industries is a Compliance, Safety, and Health Officer. And I respond to complaints of hazardous situations at work sites. Our goal is to ensure employers are following occupational safety and health laws. And next slide. So my job involves doing inspections of work sites and employers, where I look for hazards using my knowledge of chemistry, biology, physics, mathematics, engineering, and technology. I received a Master of Science in Exposure Sciences through the University of Washington in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. And that gave me a strong background in the sciences. So exposure science is just another term for IH, and you don't necessarily need a master's to be an IH. And Venetia, can you go through to the next slides? Or? And so when I do an inspection, I am trained to identify what might cause harm to employees, evaluate the extent of the hazard, and then to ensure the hazard is controlled or gotten rid of. And Venetia, I think this one is your slide.
Yes. What does IH stand for? We are invisible heroes. Not a lot of people know who we are or what we do. In fact, they think that we're janitors in industrial settings. Like Emily, I have a master's degree in industrial hygiene. My undergraduate degree was environmental sciences and ecology, but I realized was apply the science to work with people and to protect people. So we're also incredible hotshots, and some of us are probably impossibly handsome.
Venetia, I don't see the slide on the screen. Are you going through the slides on the?
I am. Are they not?
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing it on my screen.
What I see on the screen share is the IH heroes, and there's a man with a blue suit jacket holding a tablet.
Just the first
not
one.
Advancing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's weird.
It looks like it's in a PDF, so you might need to scroll down to the next.
Okay. So is this advancing them?
No. Do you have the PDF on the on your tablet?
Oh, is that the problem? Uh-oh.
that might be the one that you need to advance.
I am so sorry. So this has not moved beyond the very first one.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Well,
It looks like it's in a PDF and an Acrobat Reader. And so if you go to the right-hand side where there's the scroll bar, you should be able to take that bar and to move it down.
you may
I see what you're saying, just do that. Okay. Is that working?
no, you may have multiples of them up on your computer.
I only have this one, or at least I can only.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
there it is. That moved.
Codename IH.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
I am so
Yeah.
sorry. So Emily talked about this, recognition, evaluation, and control. So here's the slide I was just talking about. The code name is difficult for people to crack. We are invisible heroes and incredible hotshots. Okay. We're also known as occupational health specialists, environmental health and safety specialists, and these sound a little bit more like what IHs do. So IH does stand for industrial hygiene. It's an old term. It's been around probably since the turn of the last century of the 1900s. And it was focused on ensuring that industrial workplaces, work settings were kept clean and healthy for employees. We do have capes and masks, but our capes are usually tie-back or personal protective clothing, and our masks may be respiratory protection. And Emily will show that later. Okay, so as Emily mentioned, what we do is anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control chemical, physical, biological, and ergonomic health and safety hazards. As they say here, Iron Man in a lab coat. We don't often wear lab coats, but we are heroes in that our mission, Emily and my mission, working for the state OSHA program, is to keep Washington workers healthy and safe on the job. We do all of these things. As Emily mentioned earlier, we have backgrounds in all of the hard sciences. We act as investigators, and Emily's going to take you through a little investigation. We provide training, we educate workers, employers, and employees. We enforce policy, and Emily will talk a little bit more about that, but that's what we do as part of the state OSHA program. We're engineers in that we can design ventilation systems, and we can respond to emergency, like releases of chemicals. Okay, Emily, take it away.
And so this slide gives an example of something that might happen in my job. So as IH and Compliance Safety and Health Officer, I receive complaints and do inspections based off of those complaints. In this instance, it could be something like, I'm an employee working with embalming fluids, and I'm worried about my exposure to these chemicals. That specifically says formaldehyde is one of the ingredients that is also known as a carcinogen, which can cause cancer. So prior to going into the workplace and doing my inspection, I would do a lot of research. Washington State has a law specific to formaldehyde. So there's certain things that employers must do when they're working with that chemical. I'd research the health effects, how it can harm or kill employees, how funeral homes and employees are specifically working with the embalming fluids, and maybe what other chemicals are in the embalming fluid. And for the next slide. So part of my inspection process is just going to the employer, and I do a walk around of the job site. I watch like who is working with the chemicals. Maybe there are other hazards around. I do interviews of both the employer and the workers to see how the chemical is being used. Things that I would look for is are they using gloves? Is the formaldehyde getting on anyone's skin? Like if they're working with it and then they reach over and maybe it drips maybe they're wearing gloves, but maybe it drips on other parts. Are they wearing respirators? Is there any ventilation? Was there any training on how to safely work with formaldehyde? I would also request documents from the employer, like a medical surveillance program or an exposure assessment, and their safety manual. Some other things I would look at is, sometimes there's the one person working with the embalming fluid, but somebody else might be coming in and cleaning up after them, or somebody may even be not even working with the chemical, but working in the same room. And so one of the hazards of chemicals and formaldehyde is that it can evaporate. And one route of exposure is an employee breathing in the vapor. So formaldehyde is dangerous at certain levels. So I would collect personal air samples to evaluate if the employees are exposed to formaldehyde over any sort of regulated limit. And one of the ways we do this is a sampling pump. And this basically would go on somebody's, belt, and then we would hook it up here, and it draws air through, a type of cartridge that we would attach. And then, we're looking at it, we want to know, like, what's their exposure for a day or for a short period of time. And then after the sampling happens, a day of sampling maybe, this cartridge gets sent to a lab to be analyzed. With Washington State, we have our own lab, so they would analyze this and kind of tell, and we would figure out what this employee's exposure was over the course of their 8-hour shift. And other routes that formaldehyde could enter and harm an employee is if it's let's say they're not wearing gloves, it gets on their skin and it can be absorbed through the skin. And also, potentially, people don't ever think of this, but if no one's wearing gloves and they get it on their hands and then they go and eat a sandwich, they also could be, ingesting the formaldehyde, which is not something that's very healthy. And so for this example, potentially there was an overexposure. So my inspections can sometimes lead to financial penalties for employers if they are violating Washington state laws. And I will require employees to fix those hazards found during the inspection. Let's say if the employer had their workers not, they don't have any glove, they don't provide gloves. And formaldehyde can cause skin rashes and asthma if you're exposed to it. That would be something I would look at with the employees and ask them about if they're having any health effects related to formaldehyde exposure. And let's see, if the air monitoring found that they were over a regulated limit, the employer would then be required to fix this hazard. They can do things like decide not to use formaldehyde and replace it with a less hazardous chemical. Or they could do something like put in ventilation and provide appropriate chemical resistant gloves to formaldehyde, or provide respirators or doing other things. So I showed this before. So this is one of the respirators that I use. And these cartridges are specific to particular chemicals. So they would have to potentially provide a respirator for their employees. And let's see, so, when I go and do my inspections, what exactly am I looking for? Venetia, if we could move to the next slide.
Trying, having technical difficulties.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry. Lorraine, if it will help, we can provide you with these slides too. That might be better, just so you have them. But here we go.
Here we go. Yeah, so there are quite a lot of potential hazards at employer sites. Chemical agents formaldehyde is definitely one of those. There are, gases, vapors, fibers, asbestos fibers, like when you're doing a demolition, that's something to always watch out for. Respirable crystalline silica can become a dust when you're like jackhammering cement or doing other construction type activities. Welding fume is one of the ones. So there's, based off of the chemical, there are different regulated limits depending on the route of exposure. And a lot of this involves things becoming airborne and you breathing it in, and it gets into the body through your lungs, and that can be very unhealthy. So physical agents, one of the main things we do look at is noise. So we can sample for noise with these little noise dosimeter, and we would kind of attach it to someone's lapel. And, you know, one of the main things we're looking for is over an 8-hour shift. And we would check to see if their exposure was over our regulated limits, because, you know, loud noises like constructions or airplanes or other loud work areas can lead to permanent hearing loss. Other, you know, physical agents is vibrations like a jackhammer can cause injury, and, you know, heat and cold, electromagnetic fields like radiation or lasers are things that we look at. And biological agents are a big thing in places like hospitals and, you know, nurses when you're dealing with needles and bloodborne pathogens. But the big thing right now is COVID-19. And so we are doing a lot of inspections relating to preventing the spread of COVID-19. So pretty much all of you probably have your simple masks that you're wearing. And this is your PPE or personal protective equipment that pretty much everybody's wearing right now. So ergonomics, you may not have heard of, but it's basically how people interact with objects. And you're all working from home right now and probably working at a computer more than you used to. So it's important to set up your computer correctly so that you can like avoid getting a repetitive stress injury. And, you know, one of the big things is lifting right too as well. Like workers have to lift right and not lift too heavy of objects, because that can injure people. For ergonomics, due to Washington state laws, I deal less with the ergonomic hazards, but we have a department, you know, group of ergonomists who deal with that. And one thing less that we deal with is psychosocial factors, but, you know, these are big things. You know, happy workers, you know, you have better retention and productivity, but also fatigue and being tired at work can lead to injuries. And next slide for you, Venetia.
Great. So once you become an industrial hygienist, there are a lot of industries or organizations that you could work for. As we said, Emily and I both work for government, but you could work for a consulting firm. In those two jobs, we get to see a variety of workplaces, but some industrial hygienists work for chemical companies, refineries, in laboratories, for public utilities, manufacturing, of course, insurance companies. There is a wide variety of workplaces that hire industrial hygienists. And then, as I said, in consulting and government, we get the opportunity to see a wide variety of workplaces and understand how things are made and see what people do. So it's never boring. I learn something new every day on this job. The pay is pretty good. I don't want you to get too excited by seeing the average mean salary in a recent survey put out by AIHA was over $105,000. Because keep in mind that this is an average, so it's ranging from people who are first entering the workplace all the way up to people that have 30 plus years in the workplace. This is also across the United States, so certainly in some parts of the country, IHs are paid more. Depending on your employer, you may make more. Consulting firms, when I looked, the highest paid person or group of people were the people that owned their own consulting firm. Emily and I, working for state government, are not at this range, but we do have great benefits, including tuition reimbursement, if you wanted to go back to school, full medical and dental packages. And we have a lot of flexibility to ensure a work-life balance. As we've talked about, education is important. If you're interested in the sciences and have an undergraduate degree in any of the hard sciences, you could apply for an entry-level job with us. There are 4 universities nationwide that offer ABET accreditation for industrial hygiene programs undergraduate, and 22 that offer it at the master's level. There's a website here if you want to learn more. This is again put out by our trade association or professional association, and they're out of Washington, D.C. The University of Washington also has programs undergraduate in environmental health and in exposure sciences and industrial hygiene, as Emily mentioned. So if you want to learn more, here's our website that does have a lot of information on it. And we can also share our contact information if you're interested. I don't think either Emily or I knew what an industrial hygienist was until later. I was looking for a job that would combine my science and environmental studies, toxicology, with protecting people. And so stumbled upon industrial hygiene and decided to go to graduate school with it. Okay, now I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can do a little show and tell. Glitched earlier. So Emily, did you want to show some of the stuff you showed earlier? Because I don't see it with the slides.
So this is the sound dosimeter. And you can kind of see at one point it reached a max of 105 decibels. That's when I turned on the PPI that I gave Venetia, which is a very loud noise. And as I'm talking, I think it's reaching like 82 decibels or something. So, you know, we are more looking for a kind of averages over a work shift, 8 hours. So, you know, if you reach a regulated limit, which is 85 decibels, then there are certain things that employers need to do, like providing personal protective equipment, like earplugs, or also doing other things. I also showed you a little, I can see if I can, this is one of our pumps. I can see if I can turn it on. These are great. So we attach it to someone's belt. And then, you know, we put it near where they breathe, like kind of the similar air of what their breathing zone is. Let's see if I'm going to get this running, and maybe you'll be, oh, it's going to take a little bit to run. Oh, here we go. You can hear it and see that it's revving up. And so the different cartridges, it's definitely different cartridges for different chemicals. And this one is for, this is a PPI that's for respirable crystalline silica. That's a lot work that happens a lot in construction industry, and it separates out the particles by what's respirable. And this is like samples for, this is charcoal. So the for organic vapor. So just different sampling media that we then send to the lab to have analyzed, and there's additional processing that happens. So that's the equipment I have, Venetia.
And I have, this is a direct reading instrument. It's called a PID, a photoionization detector. It just picks up all volatile organic compounds in the air. So it's specifically what chemical, but it'll give you an idea that, hey, there's a lot of organics in the air. And I was going to demonstrate just with a Sharpie. I think, you see the numbers?
Maybe the angle. It's got the.
Oh, there. Well, so Sharpies give off a lot. So the alarm went off, it goes off at 50 parts per million. We don't know what the chemical is, although I do know that I believe it's xylene in these. not necessarily harmful levels unless you sniff these all day, every day, but that's an indicator of what we might see in a workplace. We also have, as Emily mentioned, for control measures, we will test the air, the ventilation. So we want to make sure that a workplace has good ventilation to draw the airborne contaminants away from the worker's breathing zone. So we use this extends out pretty far. So we don't have to be in the hazard. We can hold it up to something or hold it up to the ventilation. But you can see the numbers on this move, you know, as we're measuring the airflow. So we do have regulations that require specific airflow, spray painting, or working on a dip tank or things like that. So I think that's all we had for show and tell. Lorraine, do you have questions for us? Or I know we're 5 minutes, I think.
You did cover quite a few questions, and especially with talking about education. One question that I did have is where in Washington can students go to earn some of the requirements for this job for education?
I actually only know of University of Washington, but wait, that's not true because we just hired 2 young men that graduated from Western Washington University with degrees in geology, but they had a lot of experience working in what we call hazardous building materials. So they both worked a lot with asbestos, silica, lead, and paint. So their geology degrees help prepare them for evaluating exposures to minerals like asbestos. So I also know that Central Washington University has a good program in safety. Emily and I focus on the health hazards, but we do have a whole team of safety professionals who focus on safety hazards like falls from roofs or, you know, working in a trench that caves in on them. And Central Washington University has degrees in safety.
Great. And I've got to ask this question. What do you love most about your job?
You want to go first, Emily?
Yeah, I think one of the things I like the most is that I get to go into a very high, variety of workplaces. So I see things that most people never had the opportunity to see. Some of the things, like I've been in a foundry, I've been in a jewelry shop where they were using cyanide to do gold plating for their jewelry. I've been on a construction site in the middle of a freeway, and I'm trying to think of I've been to Boeing, and it's just a wide variety of places that I get to go into and have the opportunity to see how other people are, working and what they're doing.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that we do make a difference. We are ensuring that workers go home safe to their families every day. We also make sure that they keep their families safe, and that we want to make sure they're not tracking lead or asbestos or some contaminant home to their children and spouses. I've been in the field for 35 years and I still love it. I'm not bored. As Emily said, we see a wide variety. We've learned a lot about COVID in the last year, which has been something none of us anticipated, of course, a once in a century pandemic. Wish I had more of a background in virology. But yeah, we really go into a lot of workplaces and see a lot and protect people. And every now and then we get letters from workers saying, thank you, you really helped improve our workplace. So that feels great.
Yeah. And with L&I, there's always, they definitely put a focus on ongoing learning. So there's always opportunities to take additional classes. Recently, there was an agriculture safety day that I participated in, and that's always something that is supported by Department of Labor and Industries and DOSH, Division of Occupational Safety and Health.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with our students and for taking the time out of your day to show us some of these awesome tools, let us know about the education and overall his career. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for having us.